Doctors gave disabled Mafia boss only one night to live, but Maid's toddler changed everything. The city of Verano never slept. Its streets hummed with the noise of midnight traffic, its alleys whispered with secrets too dark for daylight, and its skyline glittered with the cold, indifferent light of 1,000 windows. Somewhere beneath all that glitter, underneath the restaurants and the nightclubs and the polished marble lobbies, there existed another city, a city of shadows, of debts paid in blood, of power built on broken backs. And that city had a king. His name was Dante Ricci. 30 years old. Black hair like a raven's wing. Eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and unreadable, always calculating, always watching. He stood 6 feet tall with the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet the moment he entered. Men twice his age stepped aside when they saw him coming. Women looked away, not from shyness, but from instinct, the same instinct that makes prey freeze when a predator is near. Dante Ricci had built his empire from nothing. No inheritance. No godfather handing him the keys. He had clawed his way up from the gutters of Verano's worst neighborhood, East Quarter, where the streetlights were always broken and the police never came. He had survived things that would have destroyed lesser men. He had made decisions in dark rooms that he would never speak of again. He had become, by the age of 22, the most feared name in 3 cities. They called him Il Diavolo Grigio. The Grey Devil. Not because he was evil in the theatrical sense, not a man who laughed at suffering or enjoyed cruelty for its own sake. He was feared because he was cold. Because he never hesitated. Because when he looked at a man who had betrayed him, there was no anger in his eyes, only a terrible, quiet certainty. Like a judge reading a verdict already decided. He had bodyguards, of course. 7 of them, rotating in shifts, men who had been with him for years. He had advisors, accountants, lawyers, a network of loyal people who owed him everything. He had a penthouse apartment on the 34th floor of the Verano Grand Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city like a throne overlooking a kingdom. He had everything. Except one thing he had quietly stopped believing in. A reason to still be here. It happened on a Thursday night in October. Dante had been attending a meeting in the basement of the Porto Vecchio warehouse, a routine negotiation that had turned into an ambush. 3 masked men. Automatic weapons. Someone inside his circle had talked. His bodyguards took down 2 of the attackers. The third, a young man barely old enough to shave, managed to fire 3 shots before being subdued. 1 shot missed. 1 shot grazed his shoulder. The third, the one nobody expected, struck Dante in the lower back. He didn't fall immediately. That was the thing people always remembered about that night, how Dante Ricci stood there for a full 3 seconds after being shot, like his body had refused to believe it. Then his knees buckled slowly, almost gracefully, and he went down. They brought him to Ospedale Santa Lucia, not the public hospital, but the private one on Collina Hill, the kind of place where wealthy men disappeared quietly and either emerged restored or didn't emerge at all. The kind of place where discretion was part of the service. Dr. Elena Marchetti had been a spinal surgeon for 11 years. She had seen terrible things. She had operated on soldiers, car crash victims, men whose spines had been compromised in ways that seemed impossible to survive. She was not a woman easily shaken. But when she reviewed Dante Ricci's scans at 3 in the morning, she set down her coffee cup very carefully and sat in silence for a long moment. The bullet had lodged itself in a position that surgeons called, in their clinical language, catastrophically unfavorable. It had damaged the spinal cord at the T4 level, not severed it entirely, but bruised and compressed it so severely that the resulting inflammation and secondary injury had spread rapidly. He had undergone emergency surgery. The bullet was removed. But the damage was already done. When Dante woke up the following morning, the first thing he tried to do was reach for the glass of water on his bedside table. His arm didn't move. He tried again. He focused with every ounce of his legendary will, the same will that had built an empire, that had negotiated impossible deals, that had stared down armed men without blinking. Nothing. His arms lay at his sides like objects that belonged to someone else. His legs were completely numb. He could feel nothing below his chest. He lay there in the white hospital room, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 30 years, Dante Ricci felt something he did not recognize at first. Then he recognized it. Terror. Dr. Marchetti came to see him that afternoon. She spoke with measured, professional gentleness, the kind of voice doctors use when they are saying something that cannot be taken back. She explained the situation. The spinal cord injury. The paralysis. The complications. His immune system, already compromised by years of stress and past injuries, had reacted badly to the surgery. There was now a secondary infection spreading through his system, aggressive, resistant to the antibiotics they had tried. She paused. She looked at him directly, because she respected him enough not to look away. "Mr. Ricci," she said quietly, "we are doing everything we can. But I want to be honest with you, because I believe you deserve honesty. Your condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. The next 24 hours will be critical." He said nothing. She hesitated, then added even more softly, "If you have people you want to see, anyone you want to speak to, I would not wait." He stared at the ceiling for a long time after she left. "Anyone you want to speak to?" He thought about it. He went through the list of people in his life, his men, his associates, the network of contacts and allies that stretched across 3 cities. He thought about each face. Each name. And slowly, with a hollow feeling spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the infection, he realized something. There was no one. Not a single person on that list who knew the real him. Not a single person he could call and say, "I'm afraid. I'm alone. I don't want to die like this." They knew Dante Ricci the boss. Dante Ricci the Grey Devil. They knew his orders and his reputation and the way he took his coffee. None of them knew the boy from East Quarter who used to sit on the fire escape and watch the stars and wonder if there was something better somewhere out there in the world. That boy had been buried a long time ago. Now, in this white room that smelled of antiseptic and finality, he lay in total stillness, a powerful man reduced to utter helplessness, a king with no kingdom that mattered, and the silence around him was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Outside his room, Marco, his oldest and most loyal bodyguard, a bear of a man with silver-streaked hair and hands like shovels, sat in a plastic hospital chair with his elbows on his knees and his face buried in his hands. He was not crying. Men like Marco did not cry. But his shoulders shook, just once, very slightly. And then he was still again. Her name was Sofia Amara. 20 years old. Small in the way that people who have worked hard since childhood are small, not fragile, but compact, like everything unnecessary had been worn away and only the essential remained. She had dark hair she kept pulled back in a practical bun, dark eyes that noticed everything, and hands that were rough at the knuckles from cleaning products and cold water. She had been working the night shift at Ospedale Santa Lucia for 8 months. It was not the job she had dreamed of when she was a little girl in the village of Sant'Angelo, 3 hours south of Verano. She had dreamed, vaguely, the way children dream without knowing the obstacles, of becoming a teacher. She loved learning. She loved books. She had been the best student in her school until her father got sick and she had to leave school at 16 to help her mother keep the family together. Then her mother passed away when Sofia was 17. Then her father followed, quietly, 6 months later, as if he had simply decided he did not want to stay in a world without his wife. Sophia was 17 years old, alone, with 2 younger brothers to look after. She did what she had to do. She always did what she had to do. She found work. She sent her brothers to live with a distant aunt in the north who had more space and more stability. She moved to Verano because the city had more jobs. She cleaned offices. She worked in a laundry. She served tables at a cafe that smelled of cigarettes and old grease. And eventually, through a connection at a community center, she got the position at Santa Lucia, night shift, hospital cleaning, not glamorous, but steady pay and a schedule she could manage. Because Sophia Amara had one more responsibility that she arranged her entire life around. Her daughter. Piccola. That was what Sophia called her. Little one. Her real name was Luce, Light, which was perhaps the most perfectly chosen name anyone had ever given a child, because Luce Amara, at 2 years old, was the most luminous thing Sophia had ever seen. Big dark eyes like her mother's. Curly hair that went in every direction. A laugh that sounded like bells. She had learned to walk at 11 months and had been running ever since. She babbled constantly in a mixture of real words and invented ones. She pointed at everything, birds, clouds, strangers' shoes, the moon, with absolute urgent delight, as if the world were a present being unwrapped one moment at a time. Luce's father, Marco Antonio Amara, called Tony, had died 14 months ago. A construction accident. He had been working a job on the new development on the east side of Verano, trying to save enough money for a proper apartment before the baby came. A scaffold had collapsed. He was 22 years old. Sophia had been 6 months pregnant. She did not allow herself to fall apart, because there was no one to catch her if she did, and because somewhere inside her, growing bigger every day, was a reason she had to stay standing. She named the baby Luce. Light. Because that was what she needed. The problem with the night shift was the babysitter. Sophia's usual arrangement, an elderly neighbor named Signora Pecora who adored Luce and watched her for a small fee in the evenings, had fallen ill 2 days ago. Nothing serious, but she was resting and couldn't take Luce. And Sophia had no backup. No family in the city. No close friends with flexible schedules. She had called 3 people and none of them could come on such short notice. She almost called in sick to work. But she had already used her one allowed absence this month, and she needed this paycheck. She needed every paycheck. The rent was due in 4 days. So she made a decision she was not fully comfortable with but could see no way around. She brought Luce with her. She packed a small bag, sippy cup, a soft blanket, a well-loved stuffed rabbit named Nino, 2 board books with rounded corners. She dressed Luce in her warmest pajamas, the ones with the little yellow stars on them. Luce, delighted by the unusual adventure of going out at nighttime, was in extraordinary spirits. She chattered and pointed at the dark street and said "moon" approximately 17 times during the bus ride. Sophia held her close and thought about logistics. She would put Luce in her cleaning cart. There was a little shelf on the bottom wide enough for a child to curl up on, and let her sleep while she worked. Luce was usually asleep by 9 and would likely stay asleep through most of the shift. She would just need to be careful. Quiet. Efficient. She had spoken briefly to Nurse Carla at the front desk, a woman of 50 who had seen everything and maintained a policy of selective blindness about the night staff's personal challenges. Carla had looked at Luce, then at Sophia, and said only, "Keep her quiet and away from the ICU wing." Then she had looked back at her papers. Sophia had breathed a quiet thank you and pushed her cleaning cart toward the elevator. The 4th floor of Santa Lucia was the private wing. Wide corridors. Thick carpeting in the common areas, which Sophia always found ironic, carpet in a hospital, and soft lighting that was meant to feel less institutional. The patients here had individual rooms, real furniture, windows with curtains instead of blinds. Sophia worked methodically, as she always did. She was good at her job, not because she loved it, but because she loved doing things properly. She cleaned each section of the corridor carefully, quietly, moving her mop in the steady rhythm she had developed over months. Luce had indeed fallen asleep on the cart shelf, curled around Nino the rabbit, her little chest rising and falling with the peaceful regularity of a sleeping child. Sophia worked her way down the corridor. Room 401. 402, 403. At room 407, she paused. The door was slightly ajar, unusual on this floor, where the staff were careful about privacy. Through the gap, she could see only darkness and the faint blue glow of a monitoring machine. She could hear nothing. She was about to move on when she glanced at her cart. The shelf was empty. Luce was gone. Sophia's heart stopped for exactly one beat, the primal, absolute terror of a mother who cannot see her child, and then she controlled herself, because panicking would not help, and she had learned the hard way that panic never helped. She looked left and right down the corridor. Empty. She looked back at the cart. Then she looked at the open door of room 407. It was about 3 inches more open than it had been a moment ago. Sophia pressed her hand flat against her chest, exhaled once, and pushed the door open. The room was dark. The only light came from the monitoring equipment beside the bed, soft blue and green lines tracing their steady, indifferent patterns on the screen. The curtains were drawn against the night. The room smelled of antiseptic and something heavier underneath it, something that Sophia recognized from the months she had worked in this hospital, the particular stillness of rooms where people were very close to the edge of things. She saw the man on the bed. She had heard fragments, of course, the night staff always did, in their quiet professional way. The patient in 407. Important. Private security. Do not disturb. She had not known the name. She had not needed to know. What she saw was a man who looked both younger and older than she expected. 30, perhaps. Dark hair against a white pillow. A face that even in sleep, or whatever state he was in, carried the memory of authority, of hardness. Strong jaw. Dark circles under his eyes that spoke of days without real rest. His arms lay flat at his sides, and there was something about the stillness of them that made her breath catch very slightly. He was not moving. Not the way sleeping people don't move, the natural, occasional shifting and settling. He was completely, perfectly still. Like a statue. Like something that had given up on motion entirely. And then, in the darkness beside the bed, she saw her daughter. Luce had climbed, somehow, with the stubborn determination of toddlers who have decided to do a thing, onto the edge of the low visitor's chair beside the bed. She was standing on it, holding the metal bed rail with both small hands for balance, her curly head just barely level with the top of the mattress. She was looking at the man on the bed with the particular focused intensity that small children bring to things they find important. Sophia opened her mouth to say her daughter's name, a whispered, urgent Luce, come here, now, but something stopped her. Not a sound. Not a signal. Just the scene itself. The way the room felt. The way Luce was looking at this man with such absolute, unself-conscious attention, the way a child looks at something she is genuinely curious about, genuinely concerned by, without any of the layers of pretense and caution that adults carry everywhere they go. Sophia stood in the doorway with her hand pressed against the door frame and she could not make herself interrupt it. Luce tilted her head. Her curls fell sideways. She studied the man's face in the blue-green dark. Then she said, in her small clear voice, not a whisper, because Luce did not yet fully understand whispering, but not loudly either, just the natural moderate volume of a child asking a genuine question. "Why are you crying?" Sophia's heart clenched. The man on the bed, who had not moved in hours, who had barely spoken in 2 days according to the fragments of nurse conversation Sophia had absorbed without meaning to, very, very slowly turned his head. His eyes opened. They were gray. Storm cloud gray, even in the dim light. And they found Luce with an expression that Sophia would spend years afterward trying to find words for. Not surprise, exactly, though there was surprise in it. Not fear, though there was a rawness to it that was close to something vulnerable. More than anything else, his eyes, when they found Luce standing there on the chair with her curls falling sideways, looked like the eyes of a person who has been alone in a dark place for a very long time and has just heard someone knock. Sophia looked more carefully at his face. He was not, in fact, crying. His face was dry. But his eyes, now that she could see them clearly, had the particular redness and swelling of someone who had cried recently, or who had been fighting the urge to cry for a very long time. Long enough that the effort of it had left marks. Luce was observing him with complete seriousness. "Don't worry," she said. It came out "don't worry," in the slightly imprecise way of 2-year-olds who are working hard at language. She reached through the bed rail and laid her tiny hand on his forearm. "My daddy is in heaven." She said this as a fact, matter of fact and certain, the way children deliver truths they have been given by people they trust completely. "He says good people get another chance." The room was absolutely still. Sophia could not breathe. She did not know how Luce knew to say this. She had been told, yes, about her father, told in the simple, gentle way you tell a very small child, in language about heaven and stars and watching over. She had absorbed it the way children absorb things, not fully, not in the adult way of grief and loss, but in some deep instinctive way that made it part of her understanding of the world. Her daddy was in heaven. Heaven was good. People in heaven were okay. But why she had chosen this moment? This man. This room. That, Sophia could not explain. The man on the bed had not looked away from Luce. His gray eyes were fixed on her tiny face with an attention so complete that everything else in the room, the monitors, the medical equipment, the whole apparatus of his dying, seemed to have receded to silence. His throat moved. He was trying to speak. It came out rough, barely more than a scrape of sound, the voice of a man who had not used it in days. "Your daddy. He's a star now," Luce said helpfully, pointing upward with one finger. "Mama showed me. The big one." She paused, considering. "You don't have a star?" Something happened to his face then. It was not a dramatic thing. It was not the kind of thing that would have been visible from the doorway if Sophia had not been watching so closely, so completely. It was a tiny thing, the faintest, finest crack in something that had been sealed shut for a very long time. A tremor at the corner of his mouth. A change around the eyes. The muscles in his jaw working against something they could not hold back anymore. Dante Ricci, il Diavolo Grigio, the most feared man in Verano, a man who had not cried since he was 9 years old, standing at his mother's grave in the rain, felt something inside his chest move. Like a stone that has been sitting over a buried spring for 30 years, slowly, impossibly, beginning to shift. His eyes filled. He did not make a sound. No sob, no gasp. He simply lay there in the blue-green dark with a 2-year-old's hand on his forearm and tears, for the first time in 2 decades, running silently down the sides of his face into his pillow. Luce watched this development with great sympathy. Then she said, "Sakai. Mama cries too. She says it makes you feel better after." She patted his arm, 3 times, with the small flat palm of a child who is doing her best. And then, because she was 2, and the world was full of wonders, and she had noticed the monitoring machine's blinking green light, she pointed at it and said, very pleased with herself, "Oh. Light." And impossibly, from somewhere that had not produced anything like it in more years than he could count, Dante Ricci made a sound. It was barely a sound at all. The ghost of something. The half-broken beginning of a laugh that had forgotten how to be a laugh, filtering through tears and a damaged voice and years of silence. But it was there. Sophia, in the doorway, pressed her hand over her mouth. Her own eyes had gone hot and blurred. She should go in. She should take Luce. She should apologize and leave immediately and pray that no one had noticed. She knew all of this. She did not move. She stayed in the doorway. She told herself she would go in after 1 more minute. She told herself she just needed to make sure Luce wasn't disturbing him, wasn't causing problems, wasn't, but these were reasons she was constructing around a simpler truth, which was that she could not make herself break what was happening in that room, because something about it felt like the most important thing she had witnessed in her 20 years of life and she did not know why. Luce had settled herself on the visitor's chair, properly sitting now, having climbed down from the rail, with Nino the rabbit in her lap, positioned as though she was visiting a friend. She was looking around the room with her characteristic bright curiosity, cataloging everything with pointed fingers and murmured commentary. The light. The tube in his hand. The funny machine. The window with the curtain. Dante Ricci watched her. He had turned his head on the pillow so he could see her, and the tears had stopped, though his eyes were still red and bright. He was breathing differently than he had been, still shallow, still effortful, but something in the quality of his stillness had changed. He was not the stillness of a man who has given up. He was the stillness of a man who is listening. After a moment, in his rough, barely there voice, he said, "What's his name?" Luce looked up immediately, understanding that she was being addressed. She held up the rabbit. "Nino. Nino." A pause. "That's a good name." Luce nodded, very satisfied. "He sleeps with me," she said. "Every night. Because of the dark." She considered this. "Are you scared of the dark?" The question landed in the quiet room like a small stone in still water. Sophia saw his throat move. "Sometimes," he said. It was, she understood, the truest thing he had said to another person in years. Luce nodded with great understanding. "Mama puts the little light on," she offered. "The orange one. It helps." She looked around the room. "You don't have an orange light." "No," he said. "I don't. Maybe you need one." She said this as practical advice, delivered without judgment. A silence. Then, very quietly, "Maybe I do." Sophia could not have said exactly when she moved from the doorway to the room. She did not remember deciding to do it. She was there, and then she was inside, pulled forward by something she couldn't name, standing just inside the door with her hands clasped in front of her and her heart doing something complicated in her chest. He noticed her. His gray eyes moved from Luce to Sophia, and she felt the full weight of that gaze, even diminished as he was, even lying helpless in a hospital bed. There was something in those eyes that was not diminished at all, something that still looked and assessed and understood with a precision that was almost uncomfortable. She started to speak. "I'm so sorry," she wandered in, "should have." "Don't." His voice was rough but clear. "Please." She stopped. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "She's yours?" "Yes. Her name is Luce." "I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have brought her, I had no one to." She told me about her father. The words stopped her again. She looked at Luce, who was now examining the texture of the hospital blanket with great interest, running her small fingers across it. She looked back at him. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "She talks about him. She doesn't fully understand, but she understands more than you think," he said. It was not an argument, just a statement, said with a certainty that surprised her. Children always do. Sophia looked at this man, this dying man that the whole hospital seemed to be walking carefully around, this man whose bodyguards sat like stone sentinels outside the door, and she saw something that the bodyguards probably couldn't see from the outside. She saw that he was exhausted, not just in his body but in some deeper place. The exhaustion of a person who has spent decades being one thing and one thing only, and has begun to suspect, too late, that being only one thing has cost them everything that mattered. She recognized that exhaustion. She sat down. She didn't plan to. The other visitor's chair was there, and she sat in it, and she clasped her hands on her knee, and she said, because it was true and because somehow the strange intimacy of the dark room and the hour made truth feel like the only thing worth saying. "She told me once, Luce," she said, "Mama, does Daddy know we're still here?" I didn't know what to say. I just said yes. And she said, "Good, because I want him to see how big I'm getting." He was quiet for a moment. "How long?" he asked. 14 months, she said. "Construction accident." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." She looked at her hands. "It gets different. Not easier. Just different." Another silence. Luce had abandoned the blanket and was now talking softly to Nino, explaining something at length in a mixture of real and invented words. "She's not afraid of anything," he said, watching Luce. It was said with wonder, as if it were the most remarkable quality a person could have. "She's afraid of the dark," Sophia said. "And loud noises. And one specific duck at the park who she doesn't trust." This startled a small sound out of him. Not quite a laugh, he didn't have the strength for it, but something in that direction. One specific duck. Very suspicious duck. Sophia almost smiled. "She has excellent instincts." He looked at the ceiling. The faint smile, if it had been there, faded into something more serious, more searching. "I had good instincts once," he said. "When I was young. Before I learned to use them the wrong way." Sophia did not respond to this. She felt she should not. She felt he was not speaking to her exactly, but to the room, to the dark, to whatever was listening. "There was a moment," he said, slowly, as if excavating the memory from a great depth, "when I was maybe 12. I found a stray dog in East Quarter. Skinny thing. Hurt leg. I spent 3 days feeding it for my own meals before someone told me it was a waste of time." He paused. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because you haven't told anyone in a long time," Sophia said gently. He turned his head to look at her again. Those gray eyes, red-rimmed and raw. "You're not afraid of me," he said. It was an observation. "Should I be?" He seemed to consider this genuinely. "Most people are." "I work nights in a hospital," she said simply. "I'm only afraid of things I can't do anything about." She looked at him steadily. "You're in a hospital bed. You're not frightening right now." Something shifted in his expression, not offense, not the dangerous thing she might have expected if she'd known who he was. Instead, something that looked almost like relief. Like a man who has been wearing armor for so long he's forgotten it's on, and someone has, just once, treated him like he's a person underneath. Luce looked up from her conversation with Nino and studied him with fresh attention. "Are you sad?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. It came out more honest than he expected. More honest than anything he had said in years. Luce slid off her chair, walked the 2 steps to the bed, and very carefully, very deliberately, placed Nino the rabbit on the mattress beside his hand. Nino makes sad better, she said. And then she climbed back onto her chair and looked at her mother, mission accomplished, as if this were simply obvious and she did not understand why nobody else had thought of it. Somewhere past midnight, Luce fell asleep. She did it the way very small children do, without transition, without winding down, just there one moment and asleep the next, curled sideways on the wide visitor's chair with her cheek resting on the armrest and her breathing gone deep and soft and regular. Nino was back in her arms. Her eyelashes made small dark crescents on her cheeks. Sophia watched her sleep with the expression mothers get when they look at their sleeping children, unguarded, wholly tender, a love so total it has no performance in it. Dante watched Sophia watch her daughter. He had not meant for the conversation to continue as long as it had. He had not meant to talk at all, had barely talked in 2 days, barely had the energy for it, barely saw the point. But the young woman with the tired eyes and the steady voice had stayed, and something about her presence in the room, her quietness, her lack of fear, her lack of the particular kind of performance that everyone else around him engaged in, either deference or hostility, made the silence between them feel like the most natural thing in the world. He had talked. Not about himself, not directly, not in the way of confession or disclosure. But in the way that sometimes happens late at night with strangers, when the rules of daylight don't apply and the darkness creates a permission for honesty that the sun would not allow. He had talked around the edges of himself. She had told him things, too. About Tony, her husband, not the tragedy of his death but the texture of who he was. How he used to leave notes in her coat pockets so she'd find them later. How he sang badly and didn't know it and she had never told him because she loved it. How he had named the baby, in the last week before he died, before the accident, when he was just her husband sitting across from her at the kitchen table arguing for names. He said Luce because he said she was going to be the brightest thing in any room she was ever in, Sophia said. She looked at her sleeping daughter. He was right. How do you do it? Dante asked. She looked at him. After something like that. How do you keep going? He said it with genuine bewilderment, like a man who genuinely could not solve this equation. How do you not just stop? Sophia was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands. Luce, she said simply. I keep going because she needs me to. And then after a while. She paused, choosing words carefully. After a while, it becomes true by itself. You keep going because that's what you do, and then one day you realize you want to keep going. Not because you have to. Because there's still something. She looked up at him. There's always still something. He absorbed this. He stared at the ceiling with the specific quality of attention of a person who is examining not the ceiling but what lies behind it. I don't think I've wanted anything in a long time, he said. Not really. I've wanted to win. To not lose. To stay ahead. He paused. That's not the same thing. No, she agreed. It's not. When I was young, he stopped. Started again. When I was young, I thought power would feel like freedom. Like if I was powerful enough, I'd be free of everything I was afraid of. The cold. The hunger. The feeling that you're nothing and no one in the world doesn't care if you're here or not. His voice had gone low and even. Not self-pitying. Just honest in the dark. But you get the power and the fear doesn't go away. It just changes shape. Sophia listened without interrupting. I don't know when it stopped being about surviving and started being about nothing, he said. There wasn't a day. There wasn't a moment. It was like, he searched for the image. Like a fire that burns down to just coals and you stop watching it and then one day you look and there's no heat anymore. Just ash. The room was very still. And then a 2-year-old climbs up on the chair next to you and asks if you're sad, Sophia said quietly. A long pause. And suddenly I was, he said. I don't know how to explain that. I'd been lying here for 2 days feeling nothing, not fear, not pain, not anything, just this gray, static. And she stood there and asked me why I was crying, and it was like she could see something that I couldn't see, and then I could see it too. He stopped. I was crying. I just didn't know it. Sophia looked at him steadily. Children see what's real, she said. They haven't learned to look away from it yet. He turned his head to look at Luce sleeping. Something in his face, in the way he looked at that small sleeping form, that child with her curls and her stuffed rabbit and her complete fearless openness to the world, was the face of a man seeing something he had forgotten existed. Not just a sleeping child. Something the sleeping child represented. Some quality of the world that he had been certain, for decades, was the luxury of weak people. The quality of being soft enough to be reached. He had spent his whole life making himself unreachable. He had understood this as strength. He had built walls, and more walls, and walls behind those, until there was no version of himself that wasn't defended, wasn't armored, wasn't calculating even its own emotions. And this child had walked through all of it in 4 minutes. Not by force. Not by cleverness. Just by standing there with her head tilted and her curls falling sideways and saying, "Why are you crying?" with the total matter-of-fact directness of someone who had not yet learned that there are questions you are not supposed to ask. He thought about East Quarter. He thought about the dog with the hurt leg that he had fed for 3 days. He thought about the fire escape and the stars and the boy who had believed, quietly and without telling anyone, that there was something better somewhere out there. He thought about what that boy would say if he could see the man he had become. The thought was not comfortable. He lay with the discomfort of it, consciously, which was new. He usually moved away from discomfort. He had excellent mechanisms for moving away from discomfort: work, control, the next decision, the next problem, the next transaction. There was always something to fill the space where feeling was. There was nothing to fill the space now. Just the room. The monitors. The sleeping child. The young woman who had sat with him in the dark and talked to him like a person. And the weight, heavy and real and impossible to ignore, of everything he had done in his 30 years. Not guilt, exactly. He was too honest with himself for easy guilt. Guilt suggests a person didn't know they were doing wrong, or at least didn't acknowledge it. He had always known. He had simply decided that the calculus worked out, that power was worth the cost, that the world was cruel anyway, and he was just operating within the rules of the world as he had found them. Now, in this room, that calculus felt like a lie he had told himself for so long he had stopped noticing it was a lie. "I've hurt people," he said. Sophia did not respond immediately. She was looking at her daughter. "I know," she said finally. Simply. Not accusing. Not forgiving. Just acknowledging. "You know who I am? I've heard things." She paused. "I don't know facts. I know enough." He waited for her to move. To take Luce and leave. To do what people with sense did when they fully processed who they were in a room with. She didn't move. "Why are you still here?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because my daughter put her rabbit next to your hand and fell asleep in your room, and because I think," she stopped. Considered. went on. I think the people who have done the worst things are sometimes the same people who know the best, in the end, what those things cost. And there's something in you that's trying to count the cost. And that matters. He stared at the ceiling. Outside, down the corridor, he could hear the faint sound of the nurse's station. The night going on. The world continuing. I'm probably dying, he said. The first time he had said the words out loud. Maybe, Sophia said. The doctors think. I know what the doctors think. She looked at him. What do you think? Another silence. Longer. He looked at the ceiling, and then at the monitors, and then at Luce sleeping with her rabbit, and then, finally, back at Sophia. I think, he said slowly, that for the first time in 20 years, I actually want to find out. Dr. Elena Marchetti was not supposed to be on the 4th floor at 2:47 in the morning. She had gone home at 11, she was conscientious about rest, knew that a surgeon who didn't sleep made mistakes, but she had not been able to sleep. She had lain in the dark of her apartment thinking about room 407 with the particular low-grade anxiety of a physician who has told a patient he is probably dying and who is not fully at peace with that prognosis even while knowing, medically, that she has done everything available to her. She drove back. She told herself she would just check the charts. The first thing she noticed was that his blood pressure reading was different. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would have triggered an alarm. But Dr. Marchetti had looked at Dante Ricci's stats so many times in the past 2 days that she knew them the way she knew her own breathing, and this was different. The catastrophic downward trend, the slow, steady deterioration that the numbers had been tracing like a map toward the inevitable, had paused. Not reversed. Paused. She frowned at the chart. She went back. She looked at the readings from the past hour. They were holding. Not improving, exactly, but not declining. Holding in a way they had not held for 36 hours. She pulled up the inflammatory markers from the last blood draw. The infection numbers, which had been climbing with relentless consistency, had also, in the last 2 hours, stopped climbing. Paused. Dr. Marchetti stood at the nurse's station in the middle of the night and looked at these numbers with the carefully neutral expression of a scientist who knows that 1 data point is not a trend and that 2 data points are barely a trend and that the most dangerous thing a doctor can do is want the numbers to mean something, and therefore she was going to be very careful and not want these numbers to mean something. She went to check on him herself. She pushed open the door of room 407 quietly, ready for the dark and the silence and the still figure she had last seen at 9 in the evening. She was not ready for what she found. There was a young woman sitting in one of the visitors' chairs, dark hair, quiet eyes, wearing the pale blue uniform of the cleaning staff. A small child was asleep in the other chair. And Dante Ricci, who had not made voluntary eye contact with anyone in 2 days, was lying with his head turned toward them, eyes open and awake, and something in his face that Dr. Marchetti took one look at and could not medically explain and so filed, temporarily, under environmental factors. He noticed her in the doorway. His gray eyes found her. "Doctor," he said. His voice was rough but present. "Mr. Ricci." She came in, keeping her movements quiet so as not to wake the child. She glanced at Sophia, who had gone slightly rigid with the guilt of an employee caught somewhere she shouldn't be. Dr. Marchetti gave her one look and chose, as Nurse Carla had, to file the situation under does not require intervention. "I saw your numbers. Good or bad?" "Stable." She came to his side, checked his pulse herself, old habit, she always preferred her fingers to the machines. "How are you feeling?" A pause. "Different," he said. "From earlier." "Different how?" He considered the question with what appeared to be genuine thoughtfulness. "Less like I'm already gone," he said. "More like I'm still here." She looked at him for a moment. Then she made a note on her tablet that said patient alert and oriented, effect notably changed from 2100 hours assessment. She did not write what she was actually thinking, which was that she had sat with patients long enough to know that the will to live, a thing that could not be quantified or prescribed or administered intravenously, was not nothing. Was not, in fact, a small thing. Was possibly the largest thing. She had seen people survive who shouldn't have, and she had seen people decline who had no medical reason to, and in the gap between the two, she had always suspected, lived something the textbooks called patient effect and psychological factors, and the rest of it, all the clinical language that was trying very hard not to say the heart matters. What you believe about yourself and your life, at the deepest level, matters. She looked at the sleeping child. She looked at the young woman who was studying her hands. She looked at Dante Ricci, who was watching the sleeping child with the expression of a man who has found, in a dark room, an unexpected light. She said, professionally, "I'll check back in an hour." And then, unprofessionally, she added, "Try to rest. But if you're talking, that's fine too." She left. The door settled quietly. Sophia exhaled slowly. "She's not going to make me leave," she said softly. "Doesn't seem like it," he said. A pause. Luce stirred slightly in her sleep, resettled, went still again. The monitors kept their patient rhythm. "Your numbers are stable," Sophia said softly. She had heard enough of the conversation to understand the meaning. "For now." "For now is enough," she said. "For now is all any of us has." He looked at her. "You believe that? Actually believe it?" "I have a 2-year-old and I work nights and I have 40 euros left until Friday," she said dryly. "I very much believe in for now." The ghost sound came again, that almost laugh, more recognizable this time, a little more like what it was supposed to be. It hurt him physically, she could see it, the way his face contracted, but he didn't stop it. "My name is Dante," he said. He said it carefully, just the name, just that, as if he was testing whether the person underneath the title still existed. Not the other thing. "I know," she said. "I'm Sophia." She paused. "And she's Luce." "Sophia and Luce," he repeated. He said the names like they were things worth holding on to. "And Nino." "Nino is non-negotiable," Sophia confirmed seriously. "He goes everywhere." "Smart rabbit," Dante said. He looked at the stuffed animal still tucked under Luce's arm. "Loyal." "The most loyal," she agreed. Another silence, but it was the silence of people who have found a frequency, the particular quiet of a conversation that doesn't need to be filled, that trusts its own pauses. "Sophia." His voice had changed. Gone quieter, more serious, the way a voice goes when it's carrying something it's been holding for a while. If this goes the right way. If the morning is different than the doctors thought." He stopped. "I want to do something. With whatever is left of the time." He stopped again. "I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to even," he exhaled. "I've only ever known one way of living." "The thing about only knowing one way," Sophia said quietly, "is that it's never actually true. You know more than one way. You've just only practiced one." She looked at him. "You fed that dog for 3 days." He was quiet for a long moment. "I thought you'd forgotten that," he said. "I didn't forget anything you said tonight," she said simply. The monitors beeped their soft rhythm. The sleeping city lay beyond the curtained window. Luce breathed her small steady breath and held her rabbit and was completely at peace, the way children are when they are held inside the presence of people who are, even imperfectly, trying. Dante Ricci lay in the dark and felt, moving through him like something thawing, the first real warmth he had felt in years. Not happiness. Not yet. Something more like the feeling just before happiness, the recognition that happiness is possible, that it exists, that it is not entirely beyond reach. That was enough. For now, it was more than enough. Dawn came to Ospedale Santa Lucia the way dawn always comes, indifferently, without ceremony, the gray light simply deepening at the edges of the curtains until the room was no longer dark but something between dark and light, the ambiguous hour that belongs to neither night nor day. Sophia had not meant to stay until morning. But morning came anyway, as it does, and found her still in the visitor's chair with her head resting against its back and her eyes closed, not fully asleep, a mother's half-sleep, the kind that is always monitoring, always listening, and Luce still curled in the chair beside her with Nino held tight. Dante had not slept. He had lain in the same position all night, watching the ceiling change as the dark gave way, and he had been thinking. Not planning. Not strategizing. Not calculating angles and outcomes the way his mind usually worked, always several steps ahead, always working the territory. Just thinking. Remembering. Feeling the weight of things and not moving away from it. He thought about his mother, who had died when he was 9, a quiet woman, work-tired and love-full, who used to brush his hair back from his forehead when he was sick and sing something low and half-remembered. He thought about how he had stood at her grave in the rain and made a decision, then, that he would never be weak again, that he would never need anything again, that he would make himself into something the world couldn't hurt. He had succeeded. He had also lost everything in the process. He thought about every person he had ordered hurt. Every family damaged. Every life bent out of shape by the weight of his choices. He did not think about these things with self-pity or with performance, no dramatic reckoning in the dark. Just clear, honest accounting. This is what I did. This is what it cost. This is who was carrying that cost. He thought about the boy with the dog in East Quarter. He thought about the fire escape and the stars. He thought about a 2-year-old girl who had stood beside his bed in the middle of the night and asked him why he was crying, and had placed a stuffed rabbit next to his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, and had said good people get another chance, and had gone to sleep in the chair beside him as if she had always known he was safe. As if she had seen something in him that he had stopped believing was there. He thought about Sophia. About the particular quality of her steadiness, not coldness, not distance, but the steadiness of a person who has been through the worst and come out the other side still upright, still here, still capable of sitting in a stranger's hospital room at 2 in the morning and saying there's always still something. He believed her. That was the extraordinary thing. He, who had not believed anything tender or soft in 2 decades, who had trained himself to see kindness as performance and warmth as strategy, believed her completely and without reservation. Because she wasn't trying to save him. She wasn't trying to do anything. She had just stayed. At 6:15, the door opened quietly. Dr. Marchetti. Looking like she had not slept either, though she was professionally composed. She carried her tablet. Her eyes went immediately to the monitors. She stood for a long moment looking at the readings. Then she looked at Dante. He met her gaze. "Your fever broke at 4:20, she said. Her voice was very careful. "The inflammatory markers from the 6 a.m. draw are down 18%. She paused. "The internal numbers are." She stopped. "They're not what I expected." "Good or bad?" he asked. She looked at him directly. "Cautiously good," she said. "Very cautiously." She set down her tablet. "Mr. Ricci, I want to be clear, you are not out of the woods. The spinal injury is still what it is, and the road ahead is going to be very long and very hard. But the immediate crisis," she paused again. The immediate crisis has changed. Sophia had woken quietly while the doctor spoke. She was sitting up, alert, watching. Dante looked at Dr. Marchetti for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If a person has this kind of injury, the paralysis, what does recovery look like? Long term. Tell me the real version." She held his gaze. She appreciated the directness. "It depends on many factors," she said. "The level and completeness of the injury. Your age is in your favor, you're 30, which means the nervous system has more plasticity than an older patient. The type of damage," she moved into the clinical details carefully, honestly, and he listened with his whole attention, asking questions she had not expected from a man in his condition, precise questions, the questions of a person who is planning, not giving up. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "Long road. Very long. But not impossible." Another pause. "No," she said. "Not impossible." He nodded. Something settled in his face, not relief, exactly. Determination. The quiet, non-performative kind. He turned his head and looked at Sophia. She was watching him with her steady dark eyes, Luce still sleeping in the chair beside her, morning light beginning to ease through the gap in the curtains and fall across the floor in a pale stripe. "I made a decision," he said. To her, not to the doctor. She waited. "I'm going to start making things right." He said it plainly, without drama. "I don't know all the ways that's possible. I don't know if I can fix what's broken. I know I can't undo things." He paused. "But there's money, in accounts, in places that were built for the wrong purposes. There are people who work for me who I can release, who would leave if they could. There are neighborhoods," he stopped. "East Quarter," he said. "Where I grew up. I've never put anything back there. I've only taken." He looked at the ceiling. "I want to start there." Sophia was very still. "Marco," he said, louder, toward the door. The door opened immediately. Marco had been right outside, as always. The big man came in, took in the scene, his boss awake, speaking, two strangers in the room, the sleeping child, and composed his face with the professionalism of someone who had long since learned not to react to surprises. "Boss. Call a meeting. The core men, only them. Tomorrow when I'm stronger." He paused. "And call Avocado Ferrara. I need him today if possible. There are things I need to put in writing." Marco stared at him. Reading the room. Reading the numbers on the monitors. Reading his boss's face with the particular attention of a man who has known him for 12 years and knows every shade of every expression he makes. He saw something he had not seen before. "Yes, boss," he said quietly. And there was something in the way he said it, a fractional softening around the eyes, a quality of the exhale that followed, that suggested Marco Vitali, who had not let himself hope in 2 days, was allowing himself a small, carefully bounded measure of it. Luce woke up. She woke the way she always did, sudden, complete, immediately interested in the world. She sat up, looked around the room, registered the morning light, registered her mother, registered the man in the bed, registered Dr. Marchetti, and processed all of this in approximately 2 seconds. Then she held up Nino. "Morning, Nino," she told him seriously. "Morning," Dante said. Luce looked at him, apparently pleased to find him still there and apparently unchanged in her assessment of him, which was that he was a person she had decided to be friendly to. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "No," he said. She shook her head with great sympathy. "You need the orange light," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm going to get one." Satisfied, She climbed off the chair and went to stand beside his bed and put her hand on the rail the same way she had the night before. She looked at him carefully with her big dark eyes, looked at his face, looked at his eyes, doing the same assessment she had done in the dark 8 hours ago. Whatever she was looking for, she appeared to find it. "Better," she said. "Just that. Better." The pronouncement of a 2-year-old who has decided that her work here is done. He looked at her for a long moment, this small person with her curls and her rabbit and her complete lack of fear, this child who had wandered into his dying room in the middle of the night and had seen him clearly and had not been afraid of what she saw and had simply offered him a rabbit and her company and the information that good people get another chance. "Yes," he said. His voice was rough and unsteady, but the thing in it was real, the most real thing that had come out of him in 20 years. "Better." Sophia stood and lifted Luce, who immediately wrapped her arms around her mother's neck and put her head on her shoulder in the sleepy way of children just woken, already forgetting the night, already moving forward into whatever came next with the complete, unconscious trust of someone who has never learned to be afraid of the future. Sophia looked at Dante over her daughter's curly head. There was nothing to say that would not diminish it. They both seemed to understand this. The night had held something that words, in the daylight, would only make smaller. She nodded, once. A small nod. He held her gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her bag, and Luce's blanket, and Nino who had been retrieved from the mattress, and she turned toward the door. "Sophia." She stopped. "Thank you," he said. "Just that. Nothing elaborate." She turned slightly, not fully, and said, "You did it yourself." She paused. "You just needed someone to stay in the room." And then she was gone, and he was alone in the morning light, which was no longer the cold blue of machines and night, but the warm, imperfect, entirely ordinary gold of a new day coming through a hospital window, spilling across a floor and a bed and a man who had decided, in the space between midnight and dawn, to try. 3 weeks later, Marco brought him something. He walked into the rehabilitation room, where Dante was in the brutal, humbling, inch-by-inch work of learning to move again, working with a physical therapist who was professionally immune to the reputation of her patients, and he set a small paper bag on the table beside the therapy mat. Dante looked at it. "What is this?" "A thing," Marco said, which was not an explanation. He opened the bag. It was a small night light. Orange. The kind you plug into a wall socket, the kind that casts a soft warm glow without disturbing sleep. It was the most ordinary object he had ever held. He looked up at Marco. Marco's expression was, characteristically, completely unreadable. "Nurse Carla said you'd know what it was for," he said. A long pause. "She also said," Marco hesitated, which was unusual. He reached back into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. A drawing. Child's drawing, in crayon, a man in a bed, a small girl standing beside it, very large crayon sun in the corner. And at the bottom, in an adult's handwriting, clearly transcribed from a child's dictation. "He is better now. Because I helped. Love, Luce." Dante held the paper for a long time. Outside the rehabilitation window, Verano went about its morning, ordinary and noisy and indifferent and full of people, all of them carrying things, all of them hoping, most of them afraid, all of them trying. East Quarter was out there somewhere, its broken streetlights and its cold corners and its fire escapes where boys used to sit and look at stars and believe in something better. He was going to start there. He folded the drawing carefully and held it in his hand that was slowly, painstakingly, impossibly, learning to move again, and he thought about a 2-year-old girl who had walked into a dying man's room with a rabbit and no fear and had looked at him and seen not the gray devil, not the boss, not the patient in 407. But a person. Just a person. Who needed a light left on. Sometimes the people who save our lives are the ones we least expect. Sometimes they are 2 years old. Sometimes they carry a stuffed rabbit named Nino. And sometimes the miracle isn't in the body at all, it's in the moment when a closed heart, in the dark, in the quiet, finally remembers how to open.